Welcome back to the Canadian Ruck, everyone. This is Jamie Gray. This pod is a feature of the Rugby World Cup 1991 squad. We welcome Rugby Canada legends from that quarterfinal team: Al Charron, Gareth Rees, Tom Woods, and Mark Wyatt. Just a little plug before we get into everything. If you're new to the Canadian Ruck, thank you for listening. If you're returning, thank you for tuning in again. We've got a great show on tap for you today. Before we get there, you just need to know how to find us if you have questions or thoughts. We're on Twitter at Canadian Ruck, Instagram, _Canadian_Ruck. Facebook, we have a group at the Canadian Ruck, and our email is a Gmail, which is thecanadianruck@gmail.com. You're going to find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Castbox. We're all over those streaming medias. We're also on, I think I said already, we're already on YouTube. So if you want to watch the conversation, what have you, you can go to YouTube and check us out there. When you do that, though, when you're watching and listening, which we want you to do, we also want you to follow and subscribe, get those numbers up, get these words out to other listeners, other rugby fans, and then share those messages as well. Lastly, check us out on our website, thecanadianruck.weebly.com. That's where you're going to find all past content. We've got about 80 rugby conversations up there with Canadian legends, a few internationals. We've had Sam Kane on. We've had the Beast from South Africa on. We have a lot of Canadian rugby players, both men and women, both 7s and 15s, and some administration, some coaches as well, sports psychologists. We got a bit of everything that has to do with Rugby Canada. Check it out because you're going to enjoy it very much. East Coast Roast Coffee is an independent micro roaster coffee in St. John, New Brunswick. What microbreweries are to beer, East Coast Roast is to coffee. They source from independent farmers and co-ops all over the world and roast in small batches to bring something interesting to the local coffee scene. If you're into really fresh coffee, head on over to their website at eastcoastroast.ca or pick up beans from Jeremiah's, Paris Crew, the Art Warehouse, or Woodchucks in St. John, New Brunswick. What's happening in the rugby world? Well, let's go back to the Olympics. Last pod, I gave you the time slots as to when the games were happening, but now we have the actual finalized schedule. Let's take a look at the men's first because their tourney is a few days prior to the women's. So Canadian men play Monday, July 26th against Great Britain, 9:30 a.m. Atlantic time. I believe it's Atlantic time. I'm in New Brunswick, so I'm quoting Atlantic time. Then we play Fiji the same day at 5 p.m. Atlantic. Tuesday, July 27th, we're playing Japan, the host nation, 9 a.m. Atlantic time. And then in the afternoon are the placing and quarterfinals. Wednesday, July 28th in the morning are the placing and semifinals. And in the afternoon, there's more placing and the medal matches. The gold, silver, and bronze will be fought for on the afternoon of Wednesday, July 28th. On the women's side, Thursday, July 29th is when they kick off. Got Canada playing Brazil, 9:30 Atlantic time. In the afternoon, they've got Fiji at 4:30 Atlantic time. Then on Friday, July 30th, have France, 9:30 a.m. Atlantic time. The afternoon of the 30th are placing and quarterfinals. Saturday, July 31st, placing and semifinals in the morning. And the afternoon are going to see more placing and the medal matches. So Saturday, July 31st, the afternoon, hopefully we'll be watching Canada go for gold. What else is happening? Well, Lions Tour has been going on. I think everybody knows. Just a few days ago, they got their first real test where they played South Africa A, and I use quotes for that. Great match by all accounts. South Africa won 17-13, so good on the box. It's nice to see. Love the Lions Tour. I've had my thoughts on in the past about how I don't think it's fair to some other nations, but I still love the atmosphere and I love the rugby. My issue this time, and I've said it a couple of times already, is that COVID is still somewhat out of control in South Africa. Over 20 South African players and coaches have been tested positive for COVID already. As of July 14th, over 17,000 new cases in South Africa. I understand that the Lions Tour is as much a business as it is rugby nowadays, but why didn't they delay it for another year? It would have helped kept players safe. It would have helped kept coaches safe. It would have helped kept the administration safe, the refs safe, and you would have had fans. This would have allowed fans in the stands. And I get there's an issue around having it in 2022 due to the 2023 Rugby World Cup, but that still would have been a good 12 to 14 months out from the Rugby World Cup in France. Was this a huge oversight? Was this business talking? Was it dollars? Was it nostalgia? I don't know. Either way, I'm hoping and praying the COVID numbers start trending down in South Africa and that all players, staff, refs get and stay healthy. World Rugby introduced 6 pillars. This is interesting. So we talked about a couple of the 50-22 law, but this is their 6 pillars that they're going to focus on now. Finally, some headway. Pardon the pun. World Rugby has rolled out 6 pillars that we might not see the full effect of for another 5 to 10 years. Alan Gilpin, World Rugby's chief executive, stated that the aim for rugby is to be the most progressive, open, and collaborative sport about player welfare. So that's awesome to hear. These are the pillars. Number 1, doing more for former and retired players. I love that. Those who are suffering from injuries or long-term ailments can now expect better support. This has been long overdue. That's number 1. I like it. Number 2, a greater emphasis on scientific research and innovation. This is interesting as well. There's going to be a global roster of independent concussion specialists and consultants, not affiliated with specific teams, who will review elite players on their return to play. This has been long overdue. This review will happen within a 10-day period of the concussion, particularly to those who have had multiple concussions. Think of Luke Cowan-Dickey. If this were in place now, he would have not played for the Lions after being knocked unconscious just 6 days prior. This is something that's going to tremendously help player safety, player health moving forward. 3, study into head impact reduction. I like this as well. I'm saying that because if you're a seasoned listener, you know I've suffered 10 concussions and I've had my last one now for about 4 months, and I'm still dealing with that. So anything around the head, I always get excited about when they're trying to do something to make it better. So this study, over 700 male and female ruggers have been set up with special mouth guards that have been fitted with accelerometers that in real time collect and transmit crucial data each time there's a collision. This data will determine the direction of high tackle loss. 4, the 50-22 law, we spoke about that in the last pod. 5, reduction of injuries at the breakdown. This was created with the help by some of rugby's biggest names: Ian Foster, Eddie Jones, Sam Cane, Joe Schmidt, and some leading officials. The first will involve stricter sanctions for clearouts, which target the lower limbs. The second will outlaw, I like this one as a high school coach. The second will outlaw the practice of 3 or more players forming pre-bound pods, and the third will tighten the definition of latching, with any player binding on to a teammate forced to stay on their feet and enter through the gate. I love this. I hate that this is allowed to happen at any level of rugby, but particularly at the high school age bracket. Having those pre-bindings can lead to injuries on both sides of the ball. The thought is now quicker speed of the ball out of the rucks, which should lead to more attacking space. Number 6, the freedom at community levels to permit unions greater law flexibility, including weight-banded matches, reduced tackle height, limitations to scrums and lineouts. The desire here is to think slightly different. Also informs the other 3 pillars, a more dedicated focus on the women's games, as opposed to merely copying what the men have always done. So that's great. It's got to translate between the 2 different genders, which is awesome. Improve concussion education, very important. And finally, more engagement, more open engagement with the rugby family, canvassing opinions and finding new, non-traditional ways to reach more rugby fans and players. If these are deemed successful through the trials, they could be fully adopted into law by next year, just a year prior to the 2023 Rugby World Cup happening in France. Coming up next after this break, Al, Gareth, Tom, and Mark from Team Canada's 1991 squad. Eastward Sales Limited, your local print shop for all your printing needs. A proudly independent, family-run business that has been serving Southern New Brunswick since 1978. ESL specializes in wide format printing, including blueprints, posters, signs, and canvas art prints. They also have recently added UV printing to production capability and can now print on glass and acrylic plaques, golf balls, license plates, water bottles, glasses, and even rugby balls. Give them a call at 506-633-8885. Fire them an email at copy@eastwardsales.com or check them out online at eastwardsales.com to see what project they can help you with today. All right, so welcome to the Canadian Ruck. That intro was from the quarterfinal of the 1991 Rugby World Cup match where Canada was facing off against New Zealand. And we welcome 4 members from that squad. We've got Al Charron, Gareth Rees, Tom Wood, and Mark Wyatt. Welcome to the Canadian Ruck. Al, let's start with you. Where are you from? At the Rugby World Cup, where did you play? And how much experience did you have heading into that 91 Rugby World Cup?
Yeah, so I'm from Ottawa. My home club is the Ottawa Irish Rugby Club. I played flanker. I was also I guess a second row, but I don't believe I played second row in that tournament. And my experience as far as playing rugby goes, that was my 5th year of playing rugby at that point ever, and it was only into my 2nd year of playing with the Canadian team, having gone on the Cairns series to New Zealand in 1989 with all these gentlemen. So yeah, I was super pumped to be at that World Cup and certainly to play against the All Blacks.
Awesome. Gareth, you're up next.
Yeah, just do you mind if I start off the top with rest in peace to Big Norman there? We saw the big man, great guy. We all miss him. Huge force on and off the field, and yeah, just great to see him there. But it makes us think that he's one of them. He's not with us anymore. Rest in peace, Scott Stewart's hair as well. Norman wanted me to say that. But yeah, thanks for doing this, Jamie. Yeah, Gareth born and raised on Vancouver Island, learned all my rugby here. Got to travel all over, had a stint in the UK before this tournament, and went in '87 as a kid with Tommy and Mark looking after me and doing whatever hands to good, he said. So got a run in that first World Cup, my first cap in '86 with Eddie Evans and I believe Glenn Innes. So yeah, that was my Mark Cardinal in '86. So yeah, that was my little run up to that '91 game.
Awesome, thanks. And Mark, how about you?
Yeah, Jamie, thanks again, as Gareth said, appreciate that. And Gareth, yeah, hit the nail on the head there. We get glimpses of Normie from time to time as we pass through what is, for me anyway, my last quarter. Hopefully it runs longer than that. But I'm a UVic grad, played the bulk of my rugby there, and then with Velox, Oak Bay High grad, and also went to Vic High as well. Lots of James Bay figures in that particular group. Although I played 15, the bulk of my national team, I preferred 10, but there was this other guy, this portly guy that joined in 1986 that kind of kept getting in the way, so I didn't play much time at 10. That was Gareth's position. He wasn't going to give it up. And then I was at the tail end of my career at the 91 World Cup, and just finishing things off. So I was either going to be punted out because Scott Stewart was busy trying to take my head off every practice and was a fine player and young and up and coming. It was time for me to go. So for me, that was my last fixture.
Awesome. So the first 3 you've heard from are all past guests, and we have Tom, who's new to the Canadian Ruck. So Tom, welcome. Same from you. Where are you from? Position you played, and any experience you had hitting in before that World Cup event?
Thank you very much, Jamie. It's good to be part of this group here. I'm from Esquimalt in Victoria, and I was able to tour back in '86 with Canada to Ireland. I guess we went to Ireland, had a good tour there, and then the '87 World Cup. So the '91 World Cup was obviously the highlight of my career for sure, and I think we had a pretty good group there. I suppose from my perspective, though, just the friendships you make with this group and the fellas you get to know. And the motorcycle starting up right beside me is also nice too. I'm surrounded by the Hells Angels here. That's a problem, right? So.
Thanks very much, Tom. All right, so let's jump into some Rugby World Cup questions. Start of the tournament, you had 2 strong wins, one over the Flying Fijians and another over Romania. How imperative was it for that team to get those 2 wins, knowing you still had France in your pool? How important was it for those wins? Let's start with Mark. Let's go with you, the elder statesman of the group there.
Yeah, Jamie, and the other guys will attest to this. I don't think we could have scripted that thing better. If we had been charged of organizing the World Cup and we knew what our pool was, that's precisely how we would have rolled those games out as well. And also, particularly taking on Fiji in the wet and the rain, where it was a fantastic outcome for us, but the elements definitely helped us. So that thing was scripted perfectly for us to arrive at where it was that we were meeting France in the quarterfinal, or whoever it was in the quarterfinal. We pretty much knew that that was our destiny, and we knew those first 2 games were absolutely critical. So there were no surprises in it for us, at least from my perspective.
Gareth, what do you think? How imperative was those those two wins?
Well, obviously huge in that we're in our control, right? That suited that team well and the character of that team. I think what people forget maybe is the tournament was hosted in England. So we were in France for all those pool games, Bayonne and where was the other one, lads? Toulouse?
Biarritz.
Biarritz, sorry, yeah. Anyways, we were a little bit out of the limelight, and it suited us really well. We were just getting on with it, and we had good leadership. We knew ourselves really well, and I don't remember too much kind of like predicting or setting goals in terms of what we were going to do. I just knew that we kind of took the field knowing we could beat anyone, and that included France in our pool and probably even the All Blacks when we got to the quarterfinal. But yeah, that was who we were, and it suited us really well. As Mark said, it was a good set of circumstances. Fijians, big physical team, but no one was going to take a back seat. I mean, Stevie Gray has the greatest highlight ever, sitting down a Fijian on the goal line so Scotty can score that crucial try. I mean, that kind of summed it up. We weren't taking a back seat to anyone.
So Al, Gareth just mentioned that the Fijians are massively large. They always are. As the only forward in the group, what were your thoughts going into that game against Fiji and how to contain those guys? Do you remember anything about that?
I just remember looking at their backs and thinking they're as big as their forwards. They're just and their forwards were just as fast as their backs. So it was you couldn't really distinguish, and obviously the props you could distinguish in some cases, but they were fast and they were big, and it was like, oh Jesus, this is the first time I was playing Fiji in 15s. I think I played them in sevens, or I would go on and play against them in sevens, and that was a different kettle of fish altogether there. But like Gareth said, the conditions on the day certainly suited us, and just some fantastic efforts by the guys on the field that day to lead us to a victory. And certainly I think of guys like as Gareth mentioned, Stevie Gray and Scott Stewart and Gordon McKinnon and some of the runs he made. Just great to be part of that game for sure.
Tom, what do you take away from, like, as Gareth said, you were in France as opposed to England. You're in Biarritz, which is a beautiful, beautiful city in south of France. What do you remember from the atmosphere of those games, those two games leading up before you get to France?
Well, you're in the hotbed of rugby, and when you're fascinating for me, like a mutt from a Esquimalt, when we were getting a police escort through town, blowing off the red lights with lights and sirens, and you're in your bus going to these games. So you're not stopping at any lights. It was like you felt like you're a rock star going to a concert, man. It was unreal, and it was something that I certainly had never experienced before. When like rugby in Canada is probably right down on the I guess on the radar between water polo and something else. Like we hardly ever hear about rugby. It's all hockey and football and lacrosse and so when you're over there and it's the number one sport, when you're in those towns in the south of France, it's crazy, man. And it was sure eye-opening for me, that's for sure. But also I'd like to add, we never get hurt playing Fiji, because if you get through practice with Al Charron and not get hurt, then you're going to survive any contact games with any big guys for sure. He stomps on your foot and splits you open. And I got more concussions from Al than anybody in history.
I think that's a compliment to take, Al. So those two wins were imperative. They set you up against France in France for that final pool play match. What do you remember about that game in France against France? Gareth, let's go back to you.
I remember doing an analysis because Ian Burtwell, our head coach, was a scientist, right? So he was sort of ahead of his time. I thought he broke the game down. We did an analysis, and he sort of asked for some honesty from the group. Said, okay, well, we got France. What do they do better than us? What do we do better than them? So we started with, what do they do better than us? Well, their backs are pretty good. Well, their forwards are pretty good. Well, their team's pretty good. Their tracksuits are better than ours. They make more money than us. They're better looking than us. Everything was stacked against us, sort of externally. But again, I don't think we thought we didn't belong with them. We knew they were bloody talented. I mean, Serge Blanco and co. It was, when you look back after the fact, it's pretty special to play with those guys, against those guys, and they were kind of leaders of the generation. I just knew that, we kind of honestly had to drag them down a bit more to our level of play, slow it down, get to set piece, be tougher, try and make them feel some kicks. And we probably just didn't do enough of that on the day. We did large amounts of it, but we probably just couldn't control the game. I mean, obviously, I think they were looking past us a little bit. They were literally having a cigarette on the sideline before the game, driving their tracksuits. We were all in our number ones in red blazers. So that was kind of the tone. But we just just fell a little bit short in terms of probably getting to play our game a bit more.
Al, what do you remember of that game against France?
What I remember is, we took the field as we always did, with the idea that we were going to win, and we were going up against France, which is an unbelievable side. But I think if you took away the first 10 minutes of that game, where they scored, I believe, a try and a kick at goal away from us, if you take that away, we outplayed them and outscored them for the rest of the game after that. I think it just took us about 10 minutes to really realize that, yeah, we can play with these guys. And I remember there was a bunch of comments, when we had our breaks during the match, that, we're right there, we're in there with them, and we were. And I think we just ran out of time at the end of the match to make the comeback that would have been historic in everyone's eyes. So it was a fantastic match and a fantastic atmosphere, and it was pretty cool to be playing in France against the French side, and a lot of the spectators actually cheering for Canada. Now, granted, there was a lot of Canadian fans there, but you got a real sense that a good amount of that crowd there was cheering for Canada on the day.
Awesome. Tom, let's go back to you. You were talked about the atmosphere of France, is a big sport there. What was it like playing in France during that World Cup?
It was electric, honestly, and these are the guys you watch on TV, right? So from my perspective, it'd be like a kid playing junior B hockey. Suddenly you're playing against the NHL guys, right? That's the level of notoriety they have in France. And so I guess opposite me and Christian in the centers was Philippe Salah and Frank Mesnel, or however you say his name. And Salah had, I think, 100 caps at that time, right? And he's the guy you see on TV all the time. So where it brought reality in is the first point of contact. When you grab this guy, and he's not as big as he looks on TV, and you can ragdoll him, and you put him on the ground, and then you go, maybe the things are going to go our way here. And like Al said, we suddenly started going, hey, after 10 minutes, we can beat these guys, man, and this is very doable. And our forwards just kicked the daylights out of them, right? So, it was one of those situations where you walked in there and you were walking on air, and then suddenly it was full-on contact, and you knew what you could do. It was good.
That's nice. Mark, what about you? You're at the, you're in the 15 spot there. You're seeing the game unfold, and all three of these guys talked about we can play with them. How was it from your perspective watching the play in front of you develop?
In a weird sort of way, and I don't know if these other guys agree with this or not, but for me, it's one of my biggest disappointments that I think we let them off the hook. I think we had them rattled, really rattled. And it was right after Svoboda's eye gouging incident that we turned the heat up and we were hammering them. And I don't mean me, because I don't do that stuff, but the guys, they were taking an absolute beating. And we had all this momentum. And then in typical French fashion, we were applying all sorts of pressure in the middle of the field. They were on their roller skates going backwards. A ball scoots out from behind a maul, and then it's in the back's hands. And in 2 passes, they're up the middle of the field. They're counterattacking. They score in the corner. And I just thought there was a moment there, about probably 5-7 minutes. I thought, we've got these guys if we can maintain this pressure. But just one little breakdown mentally and a defensive lapse, and they were gone the other way against the grain and scored. So for me, it was that I left that match going, yeah, we're in the quarterfinals, but you know what? We could have beaten these guys, and they know it, and we knew it.
Yeah, I think
I would also say it was probably in the top 3 toughest matches I've ever played, and as far as how beat up I felt after an international. And you watch it on replay on tape, and there's not much to, well, there is to it, but you don't really understand how physical and actual violent it is sometimes in the close quarters of that match. So I remember being really beat up after that match.
And just say, Jamie, also there's a great moment when there's a bit of a scuffle, whistle goes, and Chris Tynan, our scrum half, best scrum half I've ever played with. Make sure John Graff hears that. But Chris Tynan climbs over the pile and just pops Pascal on darts, the opposing prop. Like, that was, to Mark's point, we were into him. And we were not afraid to step into him. We just couldn't execute at a couple of key moments, and their class came through maybe.
The game's definitely evolved since '91. It's not nearly, Al said it's just a violent game. You come out and you're in a game. It's not as, I don't want to say tough. That's not the right word, but it's not as, maybe tough is the right word, as it was back in the '90s and stuff like that. I think the game today is a little bit more it's calmer with some of those bigger collisions. It seems to be on TV. Maybe I'm off there.
I'll call you during the line South Africa first test. I don't think that's gonna be very calm.
Might be different.
No. Yeah, Jen, I'm the last person to make any comments on this, but I'm going to anyway. But I'd say it's controlled violence now, as opposed to when we were playing. It was borderline uncontrolled, and get away with so much stuff that it would be unspeakable to do the sorts of things that you could do, even in that quarterfinal match and against the All Blacks. Guys getting stomped on and punched and cameras, and it's funny to hear the commentators even talk about it. Oh, you know, if you're not in the shower with a couple of rake marks across your back of your legs, you really haven't done your job on the day. You know, people just wouldn't make comments like that in this day and age.
Remember that time you almost got stuck in a ruck, Mark? How scary that was that time once?
I close to a ruck, Tommy. You know that.
All right, I want to show you another little clip here.
Steve McDowell leading the haka, and big Norm Hadley in the second row for Canada. Massive 6 feet 8.5. Up there taking it front on. And making sure that none of his teammates flinch from the challenge. There he is. Steve McDowell, part of that very experienced front row. Sean Fitzpatrick and Richard Lowe, they were.
So that set up that quarterfinal match against powerhouse All Blacks. They went on to claim bronze. They had Brooke, Fox, Fitzpatrick, Kerwin, many others. You just watched the hawk as something that 30 years ago you were face to face with. What were your thoughts heading into that match? You come out of France, you know, as you all said, like, we could have won that. Now you're facing New Zealand. Al, what do you remember going into that game against New Zealand? What were your thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, when I first started playing rugby, I was told to watch All Blacks matches, and so I guess late in my life they were my rugby heroes for a person who was new to the sport. So to get that opportunity to play against them in the face of haka was super cool. It was surreal. I remember initially being on the side of the team of the Canadians lined up, and just before they started the haka, I was kind of shifted more so towards the center, and I'm not sure if he was actually staring at me or if he was staring at somebody else, but it seemed like he was staring at me, and I was just trying to look as tough as I possibly could. But this is pretty cool. This is pretty neat. Yeah, it was really cool to be part of that, and to play against them. But I thought it was awesome the way we stood up to the challenge. I think again in the New Zealand game we were a little slow to start, like in the French match, but we certainly came more into our own as the game progressed. And yeah, it was a thrill to play. And Tommy alluded to something earlier, and it's very true. It was like playing your heroes and the people you see on TV and people growing up. You know, it was all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're now playing against the people you watched on tape, and a very surreal moment.
Yeah, I imagine it would have been for sure. I get goosebumps just watching the haka and you guys lined up against them. Tom, what do you remember from that game against New Zealand?
I clearly remember some of the discussions with the boys, and this was a very tough group of players that we had on the Canadian team, and they're the guys that you would go into any bar anywhere and know that they had your back. And so the haka was just a challenge, and I know it's a great ritual and it's a wonderful part of rugby, but I think we just looked at that challenge and said, bring it on, let's go, right? Like, it was a full on, here we go, fellas, we're into this. And Al's right, we did start slow, but it wasn't an intimidation factor. I'm not sure, maybe it was nerves, but from a physical perspective, this group of players were up to anything and not afraid of anything. And like I said, it's the old bar theory. You know, if someone's going to sucker you in the bar, you had 10 guys going over the tables to get at them to sort them out, right? And that was the kind of mental attitude we had as a team, and it really it paid off in lots of situations for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, Mark, when you were on, you talked about doing 2-a-days at the World Cup. I think it was you, and you know, you're coming in from 3 days. You're coming in from your second, and there's Ireland heading out for their first practice of the day and stuff like that. That adds to it. So how prepared, Mark, were you going into that quarterfinal against New Zealand? Like, what were your thoughts?
I think we were ready. Collectively, as a squad, I don't think we could have been any more prepared. And you know, that first 10 or 15 minutes, I liken it back to us feeling ourselves out more than feeling them out, to see whether you could actually compete. And the guys that are on this call will know this. Every time you make a move from one level to the next, there's a period that you go, do I fit here? Is this game moving at a pace that's uncomfortable for me? And then all of a sudden you go, no, I'm totally comfortable. This is where I belong. And I think there was a bit of that with the All Blacks as well. These guys are the defending World Cup champs. You got all these stars that are sitting on there. Maybe we don't belong. And it wasn't till sort of 10, 15 minutes that you get stuck into this thing. You realize how basically fallible they are, and the strength that we had. But you know, we haven't really talked too much about this. But Tommy talks about the guys in terms of how mentally and physically tough they were. I can't, as I've alluded to earlier, put myself into that category. But those guys up front, you wouldn't have found a bigger, tougher pack in that entire tournament. And once they got to their legs underneath, and they punished the All Blacks, and that's what we relied on quite heavily. We had some very talented backs, no question, but you know, the strength of that team was up front, and I don't think there's anybody that would deny that.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. Gareth, what do you remember?
Yeah, well, I agree with Tommy. I'd walk into the bar with any of those guys and they'd have your back. They wouldn't have the bill, any of them, but that's for another day. I'd come at it slightly differently. That I think it was new territory in some ways. That we're coming up on about a month on the road, away from home. We'd never been on tours that long, or maybe even longer than that. So we're pretty antsy coming into it. And I also would say that, you know, as impressive as the hockey is, I don't think, especially the BC boys, were that intimidated by that. We knew a lot of those guys. Inga was a pretty good friend of mine, and we knew those guys from playing in the Cairns series leading up to that. And what I would say, maybe especially as we've just seen our current men's team at Twickenham and Cardiff in the last 2 weeks, and you know, for me, the gap where those guys are coming from is so big. The gap that we were coming from wasn't as big. I mean, we all three of us played for BC in our centenary, and we played in a season Ireland, Wales, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and then our last game of the year was against Allen, Ontario. So we had seen the haka. We played a lot of quality rugby because touring teams were coming into Canada, and that's a big difference from nowadays. We've seen a lot of different situations. Obviously, they were a great team. There was about an inch of water on the field. We were playing in a soccer stadium, which was really rare for us back then. Everyone forgets that. And, you know, for me, unfortunately, I didn't have a great individual game. I made a couple of mistakes in defensive assignments. They scored 2 really good set-piece tries right over my hole. So, unfortunately, that's kind of my memory. As cool a moment as it is for Canadian rugby, it wasn't my best day. And, hey, that's the way it goes sometimes.
Well, that kind of sets up the next question. What are your thoughts now? Like, are you content with that outcome, getting to the quarterfinals and losing New Zealand 30 years after, or do you still look back and think we could have won that and gone on to the semis?
Well, for me, I'll say I was content with the campaign. Like, I felt that was a team that maximized their abilities, and that's kind of what you're looking for in elite sport. Obviously, there was a missed chance there, slightly different conditions, maybe a little bit better execution from a couple people, including myself. But you know, they were a good side. I do think we knocked the crap out of them, and that's one of the reasons they didn't go much further that year, because I think we took a hell of a lot out of them. And Kieran Crowley kind of shared that a little bit because he arrived into that squad after that game because of all the injuries we put on him.
Mark, what about you? Are you content 30 years on now with that outcome?
Yeah, I don't think we were going to beat the All Blacks if we'd been firing on all cylinders. I think they were a better team at the end of the day. I think beating the French, they're a talented group, but they can turn south emotionally very, very quickly, and then they can set on one another. And that's where I thought we had them. So in terms of disappointments, it's not even a disappointment; it's a borderline regret. I just look back and go, okay, there was a missed opportunity. But I would share Gareth's sentiments in that, you know, as a campaign, for us to be against that quality of opposition was a great outcome. And that's why, interestingly, we're having this podcast 30 years after the fact, right? So it still resonates with people. We wouldn't like it to be that way. We'd like people to forget about this. You guys are old farts now. You guys should be yesterday's news. The fact that we're still being talked about, kind of intriguing, but also a little bit sad that, there hasn't been another run like that.
There's a lot of reasons that hasn't happened. And, my humble opinion is when professionalism started, Canada started going back because we didn't have that aspect that Super Rugby has, or, the Premiership, what have you. Major League Rugby might get us there eventually, but Canada and US are so far behind development because we don't have the resources that other countries do. And until that happens, 91 might be talked about for a lot longer as it is. Speaking of the World Cups, though, USA is putting a strong bid in for the 2027, the 2031 World Cups. Is Canada jumping on board? Should they jump on board? Like we'd fill out stadiums in Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal. You get 10,000 easy in Halifax. I know that's not a big for a World Cup game, but how come I'm not hearing anything about Canada's involvement? What do you guys think on that? Al, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Well, I mean, I think Gareth probably has a little bit more insight on that than I do, but I believe if the U.S. does get a World Cup, Canada will probably get some fixtures for sure in the pool, and be up to the powers that be that decide where those games might be in Canada. But I'm sure it's going to be, they're going to have to be smart in picking those locations based on how the World Cup committee sees the tournament being played out, and certainly the host, the U.S. But again, there's all kinds of conversations happening behind the scenes that I'm sure Canada is involved in. It'd be something similar to what happened in the 91 World Cup, where there might be a pool that'll be just in Canada, or a good part of the games will be played in Canada, and the rest of the pools would be in the States. So I think it would be awesome for North American rugby. Obviously, selfishly, I would say for Canada, it would be great. But there's a lot of other battles that we have to be fighting before we even get to that. But I think it would do a lot for getting rugby a lot more popular here in North America, and it's certainly going along that route right now. We've long talked about the U.S. Being a potential power source in rugby. There's a lot of things that will need to change or improve upon that, but getting a World Cup and getting money behind that, it could be lookout world if the U.S. really takes rugby by storm, like a lot of people have talked about for many, many years.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. They've got such a massive, population, over 300 million. So they've got a lot of money to pump into resources there. Gareth, what are your thoughts? Is there anything you can talk about that, or?
I can say we've been talking about World Cup bids going back 5 years with the U.S., obviously in conjunction. Everyone would want it to happen. The reality is, and this sometimes, people have a lot of opinions. We've cut all our staff around COVID, obviously, because we don't have as many events and revenue. Our number one priority is to administer the game and make sure it's safe. I mean, the U.S. went bankrupt last year because they made some decisions ahead of that were super sexy and got a lot of press, but actually, hurt their players and their programs, from their women's to their kids to everything. So, again, I'm wearing my work hat a bit here, but we're not going to make a stupid decision, but we're smart enough to stay alongside it. And it's a business decision at the end of the day. I tell you what, running something like the Canada Sevens out of Vancouver has put us in a totally different place, and it allows us to negotiate. That was a similar thing. We took a lot of risk there, and we managed it really well, and we have an incredible result, which basically, the revenues from that kept us out of bankruptcy in a lot of ways, right? Because when COVID came, the U.S. went down, we didn't. So just to say that everyone that supports an event like that, or now Edmonton or Newfoundland and Langford this year for the men's events, and whenever we can get the women on the field in this country, when those events come and you support them, that's the best way to let the world know that we could maybe host some World Cup pool games down the road.
That's fair. Mark, what do you think? Vancouver's hosting some games. You going?
Yeah, absolutely. But, as Al pointed out, Gareth has got his finger on the pulse more than anybody else. So, mine are sort of broader comments. And DTH, we got a lot of Canadians playing in the NLR right now, and DTH is down in LA. And he just we got to chatting one day, and he shot me a text. He goes, "The Americans love this sport, and if they get a hold of it, it's going to go." And he says that his games are all sold out and they're filled, and people they can't get enough of it. So, from our perspective, it doesn't really matter how that game into our bedrooms and our living rooms in Canada, but would celebrate anything that would basically give us more exposure, like the sevens as well, that has drawn a lot of attention. So I'm hopeful that the U.S. gets it, because it'll be good for us in North America.
What do you think, Tom?
Well, I would certainly attend all of them, that's for sure. And I also think that the Yanks got a good thing going down there, because they named a couple of teams after booze cocktails, so that can't go wrong. And no, DTH is totally right, and we've talked about this for years, ever since we first started playing the Americans. First time, Mark was probably 83, I was 84, and they have giant guys that played football for a long time, just no skill level or no experience in rugby. And we were saying it back then, if these guys ever pick this game up, man, look out world, because they're freak athletes, man. And they have 10 guys in that country that can run faster than anyone else in the rugby world, for God's sakes, right? So if they ever figure it out, we're in big trouble. And I think if they get the World Cup, they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, that's true. You watch, they do have a lot of good athletes, but Canada's picked up the game earlier, but their populations is 10 times, or whatever. My math sucks. They've got 300 and some million, we've got 30 some million. So eventually those numbers have to even out, where they're just starting to take off. All right, so a couple of you missed this, but at the start I mentioned that we have a quiz, and there's 7 questions. The first 5 surround the 91 Rugby World Cup, and the last 2 are just kind of for fun. Once the quiz is done, I've got a handful of just a few questions left. So the quiz is multiple choice, and we'll just go, voluntary. You can hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4 for your answer. And, try not to cheat. Don't everybody look at Al to see what he's saying. Not 5, Tom, just 4.
Okay, good.
Okay.
You can't fit more than 2 of Al's fingers on the screen, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys ready to give this a go?
Yep.
I'm ready. I'm psyched. I get nervous at exams, though, so if I crap out here, it's historical.
Tommy, are you driving?
Yeah. Well, no, my concern is now I'm holding the phone with one hand, and if I have to use fingers in the other hand, I'm going to spill my drink. So that's the worrisome part here.
Good. Just don't have a jammer.
Okay. Okay, buddy.
Right. First question. Gareth was Canada's highest point scorer at the 91 Rugby World Cup. Where did he rank in the overall standings of points scored? Was he 12th, 15th, 18th, or 8th? I see one right answer. Yep, he was 15th. So Gareth got that 1 for 1. Everybody else is failing.
What?
You can't ask Gareth Rees stats questions. He stayed all night. Yeah.
You got it wrong.
I had 4th position.
Can I tell you a kicking story? Just a quick one.
Yes.
We're playing Fiji, and I'm supposed to be kicking for a touch. We had a brand new ball, which Mark can attest to, which was like a square ball. It was awful. And I didn't kick well out of my hands. It was raining. And I missed touch again with the counterattack Fijians. And Gordon McKinnon says, "Are you trying to miss touch on purpose?" So needless to say, I found touch after that, because it's Gordy.
Yeah.
All right, question 2. Who scored the 2 tries versus the All Blacks? Was it Wyatt and Svoboda, Charron and Tynan, Graf and Gray, or Evans and Green?
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, very good. Al and Tynan.
Hogs.
I was
All right.
just outside Al too, and he did hog it. He could have flipped it out.
Actually, Scott Stewart was outside me. I could have passed to Scott.
Actually, I got smoked passing you the ball. Check the video.
Gareth did pass me the ball. Yes, thank you, Gareth.
All right, who was the oldest player on that team? Was it A, Gary Duclos, B, John Robertson, 3, Al Charron, or D, Gordon McKinnon?
Go, dude.
Yeah, Duke. September 15th, 1956. Who was the youngest player on the team? Was it Christian Stewart, Scott Stewart, John Graf, or Dave Lougheed?
Ooh.
No,
Yeah.
it is John Graf. So 2 of you got it right. Tom and Gareth got it right. December 3rd, 68. What was the score of that quarterfinal versus New Zealand? 18-25, 17-27, 13-29, 19-26. Yeah, see. All right, last 2 questions. Who gets in trouble at the pub more? Gareth, Al, Mark, or Tom?
Tommy.
In 91.
Tommy.
Tommy, before, during, and after.
Hey, define trouble.
Having police drive you to games.
Yeah,
That's called an escort when you're special. That's not trouble.
You overslept.
All right, so I think I know what the answer is for this. The cops come to break up a party. Who's getting picked up by the cops and who's getting away out of the four of you guys? Tommy's getting picked up, right?
no question.
Tommy's going to get picked up, but he's probably going to get out of it.
I'm going to get out of it. Hey, I'm going to be able to outrun at least one cop. I couldn't outrun anyone in rugby, but might be able to outrun a cop.
The ex-cop.
I got a feeling Mark and Gareth are getting away. Al's probably just going to barrel through them all.
Yeah.
Mark and I were in the corner talking tactics, so we didn't notice the cops had arrived.
Tommy's going to flash his badge and get out of it.
Mark was probably in the back.
Or it's going to be a female cop, and Tommy's going to.
Mark's in the bathroom working on his makeup, and Gareth's at the buffet, so it was very tricky for them to get arrested, I think.
All right, so that's good. All right, just a few questions left. The women's rugby program in Canada has been thriving, ranked third in the world in 7s and 15s. What's going on in the men's game to make improvements? We kind of talked about this a little bit the last question, but what's happening on the men's side where we can start jumping back up those world rankings? Does anybody have thoughts on that, or is that something that?
Yeah, I'll pop into that. I think that Rugby Canada's made a good move by reinstituting that Pride program to create that development pathways, and also the U20 program has got some life back into it as well. And I think historically, and Gareth will be able to, and Al will be able to address this more directly and accurately than I can, but certainly if you look back when Canadian men's rugby was still competitive and very competitive, and a bulk of those guys that came out of those pathways, and the minute those two particularly the Pride, once that program was no longer in existence, you look at our overall performance started to decline. So I think that's a good move. It may not be a popular move for everybody, but I think it's a step in the right direction in the absence of anything else that we may be considering down the road.
Okay. Gareth, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, no, I'm incredibly proud of the women's program. They've had a tough year, especially the women's 15s, in terms of their World Cup being postponed, but they're excited. They remind me a lot of our group from 91 and before, because they don't ask the questions about the money. They just get down to work. They're totally committed. The group of them were just out west. They're not well paid. So I think they're a bright light. The problem I have is with the question. You're not comparing apples and apples there. The women's international game is growing, and we're getting some TV interest, and our women are definitely top of the heap or potentially top of the heap. So don't get me wrong there. But the reality is that the men's game is a very different business and performance model. It's just a different playing field. I was suggesting earlier, we all could stay in Canada and go to university or become cops or go work for the government like I was. And we played some of the best players in the world because teams toured. That's completely gone since professionalism, as we know. So that's the big gap that we have to make up. I just say one thing about MLR. We found out this weekend the standard of MLR isn't quite what we want it to be. The gap is massive between England or Wales. That said, we all want to see Canada winning again in those matches. The commitment that the Arrows have made, and again, this isn't a political statement, this is me personally, the commitment that those Arrows have made, almost 4 months of centralizing. Some of them have families back home. I just saw Robbie Brower's kids. Like, they went down there for not only to be as good as they could be, but the good of future of Canadian rugby, I believe. And I know I'm on a bit of a soapbox, but I really believe this. When we used to go down to New Zealand and take it on the chin with the group that's on the call here, we were doing that to get better, and it wasn't very pleasant sometimes, and we learned a lot of lessons. Those guys, I wholeheartedly believe they went down there because that's the future of rugby in Canada, is a decent professional team and a decent professional league. And what they did this summer, the results didn't go their way, was very Canadian to me, that they were totally committed to the cause. And, again, hopefully the standard gets better. I think Kingsley's doing the right stuff, but those players made a massive commitment this summer, and we're just trying to keep professional rugby, which will be that vehicle to prepare us better for those big test matches. We all got to get behind it if we can.
So in a sense, when professionalism rolled around and all these other teams, all these other countries had professionalism, that's when you think Canada started to slip back. MLR, we've seen it's only been 4 years old. baby, it's infancy, but in a number of years, hopefully that's going to bring us back up.
Yeah, we've got over 50 players that are being supported to play and train and play rugby. So if that standard goes up, and the women's side, which is a great example, you got your Sophie DeGoodies and these stars of the game. They're doing exactly what all of us did on the call. They're going over to Europe to play and learn some stuff and bring it back. So that's where they are, and I'm really excited about this women's team, that they can come together and light it up in New Zealand next year.
Yeah, they're going to be dynamic. Al, what do you think?
I agree with what Gareth said and Mark said. I mean, and certainly, the Pride program being back involved is a big thing. But I mean, I can say that coming out of the '95 World Cup, where rugby was just getting to go pro, I think our first tour, our first games were against Australia in '96. Gareth wasn't around. There's a bunch of other vets that weren't around, a bunch of guys that were retired. And we brought some young guys through, and thank God they were there and they were playing as part of a program like the Pride. But it was a different kettle of fish. We had played Australia in that World Cup and ran them relatively close. It wasn't even close in Australia, and granted it's on their home territory, but it was quite obvious that the gap had just widened a whole lot. And I think Rugby Canada, and there's a bunch of other countries, kind of went into the professional era kind of kicking and screaming. We're resistant to it, and which didn't help the players at the present or in the future. And it took us many years to try to get that back. And while we're taking steps to go forward, the other countries weren't waiting for us to catch up. They were just getting better and better as it went along. And so that gap widened. And again, to repeat, there are certain steps that have been positive over the years, but it's not as if the other countries were waiting for us. They were continuously getting better, and so it's tough. And it's you're facing a lot of adversity as an athlete playing rugby as it is, but when some of your squad isn't necessarily playing at the highest level week in, week out, based on what's only presentable for them to play, you're going to be found out in the test match. And we have been found out in the test match many times over the years. And hopefully the things that that are in place, as Gareth mentioned and Mark mentioned, the Pride program, the Under-20 program, MLR, those are all positive things, but there's many things they're going to have to improve and get better in the years to come for us to be able to say that we're going to be able to take the field against Wales and England and put a full 80 minutes together where the score isn't as heavy as it has been the last 2 weeks.
That England game, though, I mean, you watch that, and I think they scored 5 tries off the 5-meter maul, and we just couldn't defend against it. And you take those 25, 35 points out, it's a much more reasonable score. I know they're missing 8 guys on the Lions tour, but Canada was also missing a number of big names as well, right? So, that 70-14 could have been 50-30, right? And that's much more manageable.
And credit to Canada. I mean, I think the last 15 or 20 minutes, where the score was heavy. I don't believe we gave up any points in the last 15 minutes or so. And I know that's a small thing, but we never gave up. We didn't. I think they take a lot of pride in that. Yes, it's a heavy score line, and it's tough. I mean, and we've every one of us on this call has been the victim of a heavy score line like that. Certainly, Gareth mentioned in New Zealand, there were some heavy scores were against provincial sides, and that was what really got us to the state we were in '91 when we played the full national team. But for me, I'd never been crushed like I was crushed in New Zealand. And I remember coming back from New Zealand thinking, well, if I thought I was my game was where it should be, I quickly found out it wasn't. And I made changes to my game and to my physique to try to get better. But I mean, losing to provincial sides in New Zealand by 50 or 60 points was very humbling.
Yeah, I imagine it would be. Tom, what makes rugby different from other sports?
It's unique in the camaraderie that we you live, you breathe, you bleed with these guys, and rugby tours build lifelong friendships. And the code of the game is what makes it absolutely special. And you, as every single person that's been involved with the sport before, you could just hate the guy's guts on the field. And as soon as that game's over, you're shaking hands and buying him a beer. And that was one of the cool things that I've seen in the recent World Cups is we sort of gotten away from that. And alcohol is it's not a be all end all, but sitting down and having a pint with a guy after a game, and some of the banquets we've been to with Ireland, Scotland and stuff, those build lifelong friendships. And that's what the sport's all about, is just making sure, because you're all the same people all around the world, the same caliber of human being who plays the game, making those friendships and that level of respect is what separates rugby from every other sport I've been involved in.
It's a good statement. Gareth, same question. What makes rugby different for other sports for you?
I think it goes beyond the pitch. I mean, it's different at the top level from when we were playing. There's a lot more of what Tommy just talked about at the international level when we were playing. It's now a business. People are playing for contracts. There's still, I think, in the best examples of modern rugby, that's still on display. That respect for each other and that desire to take it just beyond the four corner flags and share an experience. So that should be what we're doing in Canada, is from kids right up to the senior men's and women's teams, that we keep those values in play. There's been some incidents over the last couple of years in my professional and my rugby, Canadian rugby ex-player, I've been disappointed with. And Mark and I haven't worked on some stuff, and I'm just disappointed that we haven't always instilled the values in everyone. But there's so many great examples as well of those values coming through thick and thin. And that's really what it's all based on for me. And otherwise we could be playing soccer, basketball, or lacrosse or something else,
Well, speaking of that, so Mark, in Canada, as Tom said earlier, rugby is not one of the high up sports. It's a niche sport, but you have hockey, basketball, football, baseball, like the big sports, soccer. What would you tell a parent if a parent said, my kid wants to try rugby, but I think it's too violent? What would you tell them to ease their mind to allow them to play?
Well, I'd ask them to define violent. If you look at statistically where rugby ranks in terms of career-ending injuries and significant injuries, is really quite low. All the ones you just mentioned are well above that. So it can be a little bit misleading. And the other thing is, a lot of the introductory levels of rugby right now, it's so passive. There's no reason why kids can't, of all ages and descriptions, can't get involved. And I think getting back to this issue of pathways, I think the provincial unions and our national sporting agency are doing their best to promote those activities. Because a lot of it is touch rugby. You don't need to get into full contact rugby right away. And that's what I would say to parents. And the other thing, I get asked this once in a while, both Tommy and Gareth have touched upon this. There is something that transcends sport, and rugby is quite unique that way, that there's a code, and what comes with that code is character. And with those two things, if they predominate your life and predominate your sporting experience, it transcends everything else. And that's a tough sell on parents, but it's a legitimate one, is that a lot of those other sports don't offer that.
Fair. Al, what would you say to a parent that thought that rugby might be too violent or dangerous for them if they wanted to try it?
Well, I think, first of all, it looks a lot worse than it really is, and that's where that question generally comes from. I got injured playing other sports just as much as I would have played rugby, and I really don't think hockey or football really shows an example where it's a non-violent sport. Those are very violent sports with equipment, and the injuries that can come from other sports that are considered non-contact. Certainly soccer has its issues with concussions and knee issues as well. So I'm not really the best person to talk about, because I did suffer my fair amount of injuries, and I guess, as Tommy alluded to, that I might have dished out a few injuries as well. But it was a sport for me that I fell in love with.
Hey, Jamie, Al hurt me getting on an elevator one time. So there you go, right? Doesn't have to be on the field.
Rugby is a sport that I fell in love with for the action on the field, but as all these gentlemen have said, it's a great sport off it, and just the friendships, the relationships that still exist with people right across the country, right across the world. I get emails, I get Facebook posts from guys, from different countries that I've played against and got to know over the years. I think that's special. For me, if I had only just gone on that one tour to New Zealand to have played beside, guys like Gareth and Tommy and Mark and so many others, Norm and Glenn, and so many great guys who are, real stars of the game in Canada and stars around the world. That would have been good enough for me. But to have their friendship, to be on this podcast now, to be considered a person that you want to hear from alongside these gentlemen, for me that's special. But just the communication to still talk with these guys, the friendships, that for me is the special thing, and it's something that people pick up on when they come to rugby. And I've said this many a times, is that there's a lot of guys that I have in my friend circle who didn't play rugby, but hang out with my rugby guys friends, and they're like, I really like the bond that you guys have. I wish I had played the sport. And I think that's a telling fact and a telling thing about the relationships that guys had, not only on the field but off the field, and that still exists today.
I think that's definitely fair. How many of you guys miss playing rugby?
I miss playing. I don't miss feeling sore and tired after games, but I certainly miss the butterflies before a game, actually playing the game, and actually being in the dressing room afterwards after a win, and just knowing what a great night we're going to have out, and just having a few beers and the laughs. That's the kind of stuff I miss. Just the humor in the locker room before a training session or after a training session or a match. Those are special times and special stories. And a lot of them aren't fit for this telecast or this podcast.
That's fair. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
I miss the dressing room too. Just that feeling, especially with this group of Canadian guys, the test match. You've laid it all out there. You went through the anthem and the haka and all that stuff that we saw. But then you just sit in the dressing room, win or lose, it kind of didn't matter. But you look around and guys are bleeding and guys have given it their all, and you can have a few beers that night. Like that's a pretty good place to be when you've laid it all on the line. There's not that often in your life you really get those opportunities to just lay it out there with a bunch of guys you love. So kind of corny, but that is actually what I'd look. I mean, and the greatest moments were, talking about this the other day, when you get a big win, like we got France and we got England and we got Wales and a few others, you get that win, then you sit with that same group of guys in the dressing room, and and you look at a kid from Esquimalt or Vic High or Ottawa, and you're going, you and me and a bunch of other guys, nobody can take that result away from us, right? We beat France in Ottawa, and nobody can take that result away from us. And that's kind of a cool thing.
The French tried to, actually.
Yeah.
They tried to banish that from the record books, but
You beat Scotland in St. John, New Brunswick in 1990. I was at that game. It was awesome.
It was awesome.
Mark, Tom,
World record boy. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Got lucky.
You were on fire that game.
Yeah, right.
So lastly, any great stories from that 91 event, the lead up to the event that you can highlight, camaraderie of rugby in Canada? Maybe it's somebody that slept in and still made it to the game. Something, I don't know, something along those lines, something that's fun.
No, I just think we were pretty straight and narrow. I don't know if there's anything sideways that happened in that whole tournament, actually. There is one little story that I looked after Eddie Evans one night, and I paid the price for it, but that was part of the team culture, right? You looked after each other. And so I looked after Eddie in one particular night and missed the bus. And next thing you know, I'm sitting up in the stands in a suit. So
her name was Eddie Evans. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you know what? That's probably one of the beauties of that team. There was wall-to-wall characters and wall-to-wall guys like Danny Jackart from Sparwood, BC, right? They're as tough as the day is long. And some of the stories that came out of those guys, like Norm Hadley could be the funniest man on the planet. And that sort of built the chemistry of that team. And every morning when you're stretching at training and there was a night out the night before, it was nonstop laughter, and your jaw got sore from listening to stories from the fellas. And that's what built that team and built the culture that we were lucky enough to live through.
I like that. That's good. Well, listen, guys, it's been a lot of fun, and I hope you're all doing well during COVID, and that you're all staying safe, and that you're enjoying rugby back on television again, which is nice to see. And just want to wish you all the best of luck in whatever you're doing now, and that you're all staying safe and staying healthy.
Great. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for continuing to do these podcasts. I think it's great for the rugby community and for the sporting community to see what rugby is all about.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys.
Boy.
Jamie, I hope we're still going to be relevant in 20 years.
I thought you said you didn't want it to be relevant.
Bye, boys.
Thanks, Jamie. Cheers.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much, guys. That 91 team, that's when I fell in love with rugby. I don't know about anybody else, but that's when I fell in love with rugby. In May of 91 that year, Canada played and beat Scotland 24-19 right here in St. John, New Brunswick. At the time, Mark kicked a world record with 8 penalties, scoring all 24 points, a record that stood for 10 years. I was hooked. So guys, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming soon, we've got Andrew Coe as he preps for the Olympics. We've got Barbara Mervin. We have Kanoa Lloyd. We have Connor Keys, Josh Larson, the Thunder Indigenous Rugby Club. We have Andrew Monroe, Harry Jones, and the men's sevens will be talking to us after the Olympics. And Alicia Alere and I are still set up for a conversation. Lastly, it's been great to see local rugby action back on again here in New Brunswick and around Canada and around the world. It's awesome to go to a pitch and see guys and girls out there just playing for the love of the game. Thank you to listeners. Keep spreading the rugby word. If you like this pod, share it out, send it to your buddies. Let them listen to it while they're at work. Just make sure other people hear it as well. As always, got to thank my son, Rylan, who created our intro and outro music. Until next time, this is Jamie. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and most importantly, keep on rocking.